This is Spare Time Repair, and this is a Sansui Alpha 707i CD player. Don't worry, you're not having deja vu. This is very similar to the Alpha 607i that I featured recently. That one was donated by Cliff, and this one belongs to him also. You may recall that the 607i was crushed by its heavier sibling when it was returned in the mail by the repair technician. Well, this is that offending heavier player. And you may also remember that the technician was unable to get this one working. His diagnosis was that it had a bad laser, so Cliff took matters into his own hands and found this Kenwood DP47 that uses the same pickup. Despite its cosmetic defects, he told me it was in working condition and would make a good donor. But I wasn't able to confirm that because for me the tray isn't opening. My brief here is to use the cheaper player for parts to revive the Sansui. Cliff has no interest in the Kenwood, but naturally I'd prefer to end up with two working players if I can. So let's see how it goes. Well, I couldn't verify the fault with this one either because it also has a tray problem. Cliff never mentioned that, so maybe something's gone awry in transit. This is quite a large unit, looks to be deeper than the 607i, but it is also Japanese and runs off 100 volts. You might have noticed in the intro that this one has balanced XLR outputs and also an optical digital output. So how much different is it going to look inside? Well, it's completely different. Looks like a totally different transport, different transformer. No similarities at all. So although it looks similar externally, it's a total redesign inside. And the DAC next to these giant filter caps is a Burr Brown PCM56P. And there's actually another one hiding under this board here. And these are the S revision. So why is that tray not opening? You can see if I can force it out. No, that is stuck fast. Oh, there we go. Well, that's a mechanical obstruction. Well, even when I force the disc in, it's not clamping it properly and not spinning up. But even now it won't turn. Well, it's like the tray isn't in the right position because there's quite a gap at the bottom and it's catching on the top. So it looks like the whole transport needs to be moved down a bit. I'm going to unhook this disc clamp and remove it. And straight away I can see the turntable is too low. It's actually scraping on the pickup. I'm going to remove this transport altogether because it clearly needs some work and I'm not yet convinced that this pickup is bad. In fact, before I go any further, this lacquered finish on the front panel is very susceptible to scratches. So I'm going to protect it with some masking tape. You can see there how the turntable is touching the pickup, and this whole pickup assembly seems looser than it should be. Obviously it needs some sort of suspension, but I'm not sure it should move as much as that. Pickup is a Sony KSS 152A, and this differs from the 150A in that it has two rails rather than one rail and a cutout here. The 150 slides on a plastic channel on this side. There is an adjustment screw on the turntable. I'm going to see if I can loosen that. Oh, it's very tight. No idea how this has slipped down. Might help to remove the tray, which I can do by pressing down on this lever. Might need a bit more persuasion. There we go. This is one of the heaviest trays I've come across. Very solid indeed. So let's look under here. The belt looks okay. Maybe it needs to be a bit thicker, but we can worry about that later. I'm going to remove this pickup and have a closer look at it. Well, the lens looks clean, but it's sitting quite low. Suspension seems okay. Well, there's no perished rubber shock mounts, just these springs. So that movement obviously is normal. Oh, we've got another belt in here for the sled motor. Wasn't expecting that. Wonder whether the other guy replaced that one. I think he probably did. There's evidence that this split ring washer has been moved. It's not quite sitting flat. But it doesn't feel new, it's got no grip on it at all. So I'm going to change that. Well, actually it must have been changed because there's evidence of the original belt underneath here just turned to tar. Yeah, that isn't grease, that's belt debris. That should have been cleaned up really. And now we can remove it. And this could have inhibited the sled movement because there's goo on the bottom of this gear. And for the pulley, I'll use one of my new micro swabs. They're not very robust, these. There's plenty of old belt in this track, so this should have been cleaned. So having cleaned all that up, I'm just going to use a drop of synthetic oil and fit the new belt. Just check this limit switch while I'm here. Yep, that's good. No one could do with cleaning. That's more like it. See if I can move that screw with a beefier screwdriver. Well, it's pretty stiff anyway. I'm not sure it needed the screw. So I'll clean these off and reinstall the existing pickup for now, because I want to see if it's giving us any output. If you've got one of these Sony pickups that's not reading a disc, it's always worth removing the shroud, because that gives you access to the collimator lens under here. I mean, this one looks pretty clean, but that could be the cause of issues even if the objective lens is clean. So let's get this reinstalled. Mustn't forget the felt pad. So now with the pickup in the home position, that turntable can spin freely. So I'm going to refit the tray. Well, the top of the tray is still catching on the front panel. It must be misaligned slightly because this tray front barely fits in the opening. See, it gets stuck there. It's a very tight fit. So I might just remove the tray front for now while I'm testing it and worry about that later on. It's a slab of solid aluminium. It looks like this may have been an issue previously because we've got some shims on this side, which are obviously there to level up the mechanism. It looks like they were probably there from manufacture. But anyway, for now, I'm just going to put it back in without the tray front. So with those adjustments, let's see what's going on. Maybe that belt isn't tight enough. But we do have a disc read. Once I force it closed, well, it doesn't sound a lot wrong with that. I mean, who knows? Maybe it skips after a while and that was the issue. But I think I'm going to contact Cliff and just check on that. Because without casting aspersions on the previous repair guy, I think the turntable was just too low and the disc wasn't spinning up. And therefore he assumed a dead laser diagnosis. But subject to testing, I don't think this pickup needs swapping out. So sadly I think that Cliff has been let down by his previous repairer and purchased that Kenwood unit for nothing. Doesn't mean that I'm not going to try and fix it though. But I do need to get the tray working properly. I think I am going to remove these shims because I'm sure that's what's making it catch. But really I shouldn't be mean about the other repair guy. We all have our specialisms and I'm sure he offered to help in good faith. I just don't think he was overly familiar with CD players. So I need to try a tighter belt with this tray. I do like it when a tray is easy to remove. Yeah, this is a bit feeble to be fair. I need some 1.5mm belts because these are 1mm and they're often too thin. These 2mm ones are overkill, although that might do the job. Well, having removed those shims, I will refit the tray front because it wasn't catching by much. There's a fair amount of lateral adjustment on this, so I'm just going to centre it up. I actually just found one of the original belts. Yeah, that's just turned to goo. Well, I wonder if this thin strip of material is meant to go underneath, because that would force it downwards. And maybe the other guy removed it for some reason. And I can't shim it down much because this overhang touches onto here. See, that is now tight against the top there, so I can't force it down any further. Well, that seems to have resolved it. But I don't like how the tray is slightly more recessed than the open-close button. And it does feel like that tray should be lower so that this line is continuous. But that's as far as I can adjust it. Well, I've had it playing for a few tracks and no problems so far, and I'm not going to argue with that for an eye pattern. That's about as good as it gets. So at this point I turned my attention to the Kenwood player, and annoyingly my lavalier microphone died, so the rest of the footage has no audio, and you're going to have to put up with this voiceover commentary. Apologies for that. And the first thing I noticed is that the pickup sled rails are at this strange angle, and there's no reason why they shouldn't be, of course. It's just not something I'd seen before. So I was just trying the tray movement, and it seemed a bit stiff to me. So I removed the disc clamp, checked the turntable was spinning okay, and then noticed that the lens itself was covered in quite a thick layer of dust. So I reattached the clamp and turned it on just to see what it was doing, and the lens was focusing, or trying to focus, but that open-close button was still doing nothing. So I inserted a disc and powered it on, which automatically closed the tray, but it wasn't clamping or spinning up. So I set about removing the whole transport, which was secured with these two brackets, rather than being fastened to the case itself. There was this grounding wire at the back to remove, and then a flat flex cable and a couple of ribbon cables, but then I was able to lift the transport out, and I noticed evidence of an insect infestation at some point, and we'll see more of that later. And with the transport out of the way, I had access to the contacts of that open-close button, but no matter what I tried, I couldn't get any reading at all on the multimeter. And we'll return to that, but for now I'm going to service the transport, and I had to figure out how to remove the tray, and it turned out that you just slid this bottom piece to the left, and that released the catch that I'm pointing to here. And this sliding piece came off by just moving it all the way over to the left and unhooking the spring. Here I'm doing my usual commentary on the condition of the belt, and there was a lot of what looked like bug poop on here which I attempted to clean up with a Q-tip, but then I realised that I'd have to remove the gears to clean it off properly. So here they are, having been cleaned in soapy water, and then I oiled all the motor shafts as a bit of preventative maintenance. And then I checked the limit switch for the sled and noticed that that wasn't reading very well at all. So I removed that, desoldered it with my Hakko desoldering gun, which is just about the best thing in the world, and then removed these plastic welds with a flat blade. And after taking the plate off, I disassembled it and found that the contacts were very oxidised, almost black. So out came the fiberglass pencil to clean those up, and I cleaned the wiper by rubbing it across the edge of a piece of paper soaked in alcohol. So then I put it back together, but before I secured the top plate I just checked operation and found that it was now working perfectly. So after melting the top plate back on, I resoldered it in place and secured it with the screw. Then I put back the sliding plate, reattached the spring, and turned my attentions to the pickup. And the pickup was easy to remove by a quarter turn of these retaining pieces at the top, and then the rails just slid out easily. I gave those a good clean, and then cleaned off the old grease from the holes where the sled rails go, and then put everything back by reversing the process. I tried to give the lens a good clean, but it really was filthy, and these big cotton swabs just aren't very good at cleaning right to the edges. So I removed the shroud, cleaned the collimator lens as we did on the Sansui player, dried that off with a larger swab, and then used the micro swab to really get in deep. And the advantage of removing the shroud is that you can hold this piece with your finger like I'm doing here, and just be a bit more aggressive with your cleaning. Then I just used my hand air pump to get rid of any fibres, inspected it with my loupe, which is incredibly useful, I use it all the time, snapped the shroud back on, and then just gave the sled rails a coat of synthetic grease. So now I want to inspect those buttons, which means removing the front panel. And it's got this aluminium fascia on it, which is secured by 3 screws at the bottom, and then unclips from the plastic base. That base was secured by a screw on either side, and then I just had to disconnect this flat flex cable to free it entirely. Removing the PCB was just a case of undoing 3 screws and a couple of clips. And here I'm pointing out that this board must have been used for a more expensive player with direct track access. This one is very basic, doesn't even have a random play function. So here I'm disassembling the open close button to see what's going on inside, and this is the answer. Probably the most oxidation I've ever seen inside one of these switches. It took a bit of effort with the fiberglass pencil to clean all that off, and inside the switch wasn't any better. I actually had to use a sharp tool to scrape it away in the end. But then, with the button reassembled and the top plate melted back on, we finally had good continuity through the contacts. I then repeated that process for all the remaining buttons. After refixing the PCB into the front panel, I reattached it to the main chassis, and then resecured the aluminium faceplate. Then it was time to drop the transport back in and resecure it with those two brackets. Refit the FlatFlex cables and the two ribbon cables. But then when I put the tray back in, I obviously did something wrong, as you'll hear on the overhead camera's internal microphone when I try the open close button. But at least the button was working now. Anyway, after a bit of head scratching, I managed to get it sorted out, and so here we are trying a disc for the first time after that. After a brief pause, it does spin up and read the table of contents, although you wouldn't know it from the display, which doesn't even tell you how many tracks there are. Anyway, the internal microphone of the overhead camera does confirm that it is working okay. So now all that remained was to make a new tray front, and I did have this spare one from an old Pioneer player, but it just wasn't tall enough. So after looking for a suitable material, I eventually decided to use this old CD jewel case. It was a bit thinner than I would have liked, but it was just about wide enough. So I roughly cut it out and then sanded it down to the exact dimensions. I then attached these two pieces of masking tape and ran it over some very fine sandpaper to give it a frosted appearance. Then I just stood it off the desk on a roll of tape, and then applied some black acrylic with a melamine sponge to the non-frosted side. And I ended up doing about 4 coats. It turned out pretty good. I applied a bit of black paper to the back to protect the paint, but I had to be careful about sticking it on because this middle section of the tray needs to move from side to side and couldn't get gummed up with adhesive. Also, the circular pieces need to pivot, so I had to avoid those too. I cut out a piece of double-sided foam tape to fit over those areas and applied it to the tray. After peeling off the backing tape, I carefully applied the new tray front, making sure it had good clearance all round. And to be honest, it's a bit more deeply recessed than I would have liked, but it doesn't look too out of place. And here I'm just confirming that it does open and close without catching on the aperture. Although there's no contest here about which is the best player, I am pleased to get them both working. The Sansui is a very nice unit indeed, and Cliff was excited to hear that it was operational again. It's fair to say he was less excited about the Kenwood, which he told me I could keep. I really should get some thick black styrene sheet for future tray front replacements, but it's always fun to experiment. Now I'm off to repair my microphone. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.